Chapter 9, Figures in the Forest, June 7th. Unwaveringly, Lillian practiced every day. It had been almost 3 weeks since their first lesson. Alexander had told her he had to go home for a while to take back his game and help his parents out, but he gave her a strict regimen of skills to practice in his absence. She had managed to without fail, juggling her princess obligations where she could. She might have had a little crush, which was part of her motivation, but not all. She was truly enjoying her new hobby, and for the first time in a while she was taking pride in what she was doing. Most of her skills were honed because of royal status. She was well versed in history, poetry, conversation, and which curtsy to use for whom, but she rarely got the opportunity to engage in something she chose. Her parents could see how dedicated she was and how cheerful it made her. Thus far, it had not compromised her duties to her kingdom, so they were encouraging. With that, she took advantage of a lull in her royal responsibilities and grabbed this troll by the tail, so to speak. Lillian was sore by the second day of practice, but Grayson happily made up balms for the blisters and tense muscles. Eventually, the soreness and blisters turned to strength and calluses. She was bound and determined to impress her new teacher once he got back. Her interest in archery wasn't too hard to justify, but her new set of equipment was. Lillian couldn't very well explain where she had gotten the new bow, and for sure not the Caldarian steel arrows. Therefore, she carried out a set from the armory, but then always retrieved her new bow and arrows from their hiding spot out in the forest. Unsure of Alexander's return, she got ready for another day of practice. As she headed out to the forest, she let her mind wander back to the day he left. Like I said, the key is to not think about it, and the faster you force yourself to go, the less time you have to think versus just react. He showed her a method to grab her arrow from the quiver and nock it while pulling back in one fluid, fast motion. He demonstrated for her and got off 3 arrows before the first one had even hit its mark. That and they had each hit the bullseye on the target, one of them splitting her own. Yep, split the elm Elwood. Hey, that was my bullseye, she sounded disappointed. What if I wanted to keep my arrow? A good archer is not known by his arrows, Lillian, but his aim. If your aim is true, you'll hit your target. She smiled and bowed a little. Yes, O wise teacher. He smiled back. Good. I'm glad we got that cleared up. She retorted, maybe I just wanted a token to remember the day by. Did I just say that? Well, hopefully there will be plenty of other days and bullseyes to remember. Did he just say that? She blushed and looked quickly away before he could notice. He watched her practice for a bit and then came over to correct her posture and form a few times until she seemed to be getting consistent. Good. Now, I want you to do this as a warm-up 100 times before you fire. 100 times? Yep, twice a day. You really must think a princess has nothing better to do. On the contrary, if you didn't, I'd say 200 times 4 times a day. That's ridiculous. That's practice. Surely you understand the importance. All the rituals and routines you've had to go through for dinners and meeting dignitaries? No kidding. She recalled a particular guest her father had from the Tardillian lands. There were so many things to do and not to do so as to not embarrass her family or insult the ambassador. For 2 weeks straight, she and Andrew had to endure etiquette courses. She knew they were important to her father, so she suffered through them. But fey be true, she was pretty sure her father was glad to see his guest go after a few days. He spent the next 3 lounging around in the castle in his robe and slippers. All right, I'll do what I can. Try to make a cadence of sorts. A cadence? Yeah, like a rhythm. It'll help with the consistency. When I first started, my dad taught me shoes, shoulders, sight, select, slide, sigh, shoot. Basically, it helps you remember the essentials. Shoes and shoulders, make sure your feet and body are lined up. Sight, find your target. Select, grab your arrow and nock. Slide the string back, let your breath out, and release. You go through all of that before you shoot? Well, no, not anymore. I mean, I guess I do, but just subconsciously. But yeah, when I started, it was slow and steady. The form is the foundation for everything. Without it, you won't hit the fat side of a bear's rear end. Lillian laughed along with Alexander. That memory brought a smile to her face as she practiced. Shoes, shoulders, sight, select, slide, sigh, shoot. 58. He had made an adjustment with a smaller bow and left it with her, along with a couple of Calderan arrows to practice. But don't rush it. Better not taught than ill taught. Trust me. Shoot, shoulders, sight, select, slide, sigh, shoot. 59. When she asked what that meant, all she got was, "You'll see," and a wink. She had to admit she was getting faster. She wasn't sure how well she would hit a target, but she had to look intimidating, which counted for something, right? Now she was just shooting to gauge distance as per instructions. Shoot, shoulders, sight, select, slide, sigh, shoot. 60. She had to admit Alexander's method seemed a little unorthodox, but after the second week, she could really see results. She was able to cluster her arrows within about a 1-foot circle at a short, medium, and long range, which in the beginning was only about 30 paces, but had since increased to 50. Shoot, shoulders, sight, select, slide, sigh, shoot. 61. Yeah, think again, rogues. Princess Lillian's just done another pretty face. She's crack. Lillian spun around, drawing an arrow immediately in one fluid motion. A small rabbit came out from under a thackleberry bush. Even though she knew she probably wouldn't have hit it, Lillian quickly lowered the bow. A moment passed. The rabbit gave her an inquisitive look and then hopped away. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. But then she took it all in. The pure motion she had, not thinking about it, simply acting. Alexander is a better teacher than I thought. She took a couple of breaths and then allowed herself a smile. So that's what he's talking about. She had finished her set and had taken a pause for some water when some movement caught the corner of her eye. As she turned to look, she saw it was no animal this time, but a person. And not just a person, but people. 2 men to be exact, about 150 paces out. Lillian was fairly certain they hadn't noticed her. What are they doing all the way out here beyond the castle? She decided to find out. Lillian was able to keep her distance well enough while still keeping the 2 figures in sight. She concluded they hadn't seen her because they had not bothered to lower their voices. The wind was blowing toward her from their direction. She couldn't quite make out what they were saying, but they were definitely arguing. The taller one was really letting the shorter one have it. Lillian usually wasn't one to be the mouse on the walls, but the entire situation intrigued her. She never saw anyone this far north of the castle, let alone 2 people having a heated conversation. She had to get closer. Once again, her familiarity with the area proved beneficial. She moved with ease, barely making a disturbance. She had closed about half the distance when they stopped. Everything place. There's no... The taller man was very animated. The other man cowered. Lillian couldn't tell if he was intimidated because of his lack of comparative height or if it was just his demeanor. The wind whipped words towards her, but only enough to weave together bits of phrases. I have to get closer. She stood up to move, but met resistance. Someone had grabbed her from behind. She turned to face her foe, but the assailant had her across the chest. She dug her feet in and twisted harder. Crack! A large branch snapped away from the tree she was next to, having caught on her bow. Thank the Fae. She had gotten so focused on the 2 men she had forgotten about the extra appendage strapped around her back. Heart racing, she tried to conceal herself from the 2 figures. They had to have heard that. What if they find me? She waited a moment and listened. Don't care. I'm not fault if... She readjusted her bow, more mindful of it now, and moved on. The strangers moved on as well. Where could they possibly be going? There's nothing out here. A few moments later, the men stopped again by an outcropping of boulders that joined up with the Cranith Mountains a few leagues away. Lillian moved to within 15 paces, close enough to hear their conversation and then some. Apparently, the ruffians did not get the opportunity to bathe on a frequent basis. Lillian stifled a cough and strained her ears. She wasn't used to hearing common tongue much, but she could make out most of it. I told you it's the best chance we'll get, the taller man insisted in a now obvious Danian accent. Peering through a bush, Lillian could now get a little more detail about her visitors. They were both dressed in similar garb, brown trousers, dirty tunics, and leather boots. The tall one had a rope tied around his waist, definitely for keeping his pants up versus decoration. Lillian thought Slim was an apt nickname, though emaciated might have been a better description. He may have been 6 feet tall, but no more than 120 pounds. And that's if his clothes were soaked. Unshaven, dark, oily hair and dirt smudges abounded. But it's in the middle of town. It'll be crowded. We'll get nicked for sure. the short one answered back. Pork, Lillian decided to call him, was a good deal shorter and maybe 100 pounds heavier. But it wasn't just because of his portly nature Lillian chose Pork. His nose turned up just enough to resemble that of a pig, and she swore every time he spoke she caught a whiff of burnt bacon. That's why it's called a planned dragon dong. Slim hit Pork upside the head. Besides, no one's going to see you. You just have to make sure the tunnel is clear. Slim reassured his portly friend. Pork nodded in agreement. I know. It's just the king has really stepped up the security, and if we get caught, he'll... We won't get caught. And the security is the whole reason why it has to be now or never. Don't you think he hasn't fought this through? He who? Whatever they were talking about didn't sound just like a simple, well, whatever they were talking about. He's got eyes and ears everywhere, my friend, Slim continued. Trust me. Trust him. He's been waiting a long time for this. But why did we have to alert them at the castle? It doesn't make any sense to put them on their guard. Pork still seemed unsure. Slim leaned close to Pork. Misdirection, my friend. All great magicians use it. And this is just the opening act. Come on, let's go join the others for a game of tumbler. It'll take your mind off things. The two started to walk off again around the bend of some boulders. Lillian did not like the sound of any of this. Others? Magicians? What are they talking about? She crept out of hiding when she was sure they were out of sight around the corner. She got to the boulders and listened for them. Nothing. She decided to peek around the corner. No one. What? But where did they go? The two had pulled off their own magic trick. They were nowhere to be seen, and there was nowhere to have gone. There was solid rock on one side and open field on the other. They had simply disappeared. Lillian searched for a good half hour before finally giving up. She knew there had to be some sort of secret passage with a hidden latch or button somewhere, but for now, it eluded her. More time had passed than she had realized as her shadow stretched before her. She decided to head back to the castle and would continue practicing tomorrow. Lillian's mind wandered on what the two men had been discussing. And what would she tell her father? I should tell him. This is probably important, right? Or is it really? I mean, what do I truly have to tell him? They sound like they're just planning on stealing something from somewhere in town. That kind of stuff doesn't happen often, but it does happen. That's really not something for me to bother him with. What would he do? Close off the forest? That would mean no more lessons. No, I'll tell Sir Alger. He can handle it. It's really his job after all. No reason to bother father with this. Even though Lillian had come to a logical conclusion about today's events, there was still something in the back of her mind that just didn't sit right. She couldn't quite place it, but until she did, she'd just have to trust Sir Alger would take care of it. She was so lost in her thoughts that she barely noticed the buck that had been following her. He was a good size, 10 points if Lillian saw right. He was only about 30 paces behind her. As she turned to get a good look at him, he stopped. She didn't recognize him, which was odd. A deer that big had to have been around for a while, and Lillian was almost sure she had never seen him, especially when he started trotting again, getting closer. He had a strange black marking on his chest, and his eyes. Are his eyes? But Lillian never got a chance to finish her thought. The massive, unfamiliar buck started to charge right for her. Bum, bum, bum.